You're welcome to the Economy and Politics Show. I'm Ottoabasi Abasiekong. This edition will discuss repositioning Nigeria's trade policy for global competitiveness. Joining me virtually for this conversation is Dr. Muda Yusuf, the CEO for the Center for Protection of Private Enterprise. It's nice to have you once again on the program.
Thank you very much, Otto. It's a pleasure.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Let us begin first with the reality that Nigeria's fiscal policy framework has been weakened by the absence of a coherent trade policy in the last decade. This has really had a cost on our trade and development. What's your assessment of this in terms of the impact it has had on our trade?
Well, trade is also a very important instrument to stimulate investment. Because to the extent that no country can be self-sufficient in everything, trade is something that is critical, no matter the level of development. But one essential attribute of trade is stability and consistency of policy. What we have seen over the decade is quite a number of instability of policy, particularly trade policy, because almost on an annual basis, you see one modification, one review or the other. And at a time, we even saw a kind of incursion or intrusion of monetary policy into trade policy under the previous administration in the Central Bank of Nigeria. The tariff book, for instance, is typically about 7 years. Then under the CET, that is the Common External Tariff, it was reviewed to 5 years. And the essence of that kind of time horizon is to ensure stability and certainty. But when that principle is disrupted, it has a way of affecting trade. And we have seen disruptions coming as a result of border closure, for instance, notwithstanding the fact that we have a protocol that we have signed with ECOWAS. We have seen some, disruption on trade policy by arbitrary import prohibitions, and things like that. And of course, we saw the intrusion of monetary policy under the Emefiele regime when we had these 41 items that were excluded practically from trade. Because to the extent that they were excluded from foreign exchange market, they were practically excluded from trade. So these are some of the, disruptions that we are seeing in international trade, particularly within the context of trade policy. And we have not given sufficient attention to the issue of trade policy. Perhaps we have not fully appreciated the significance of trade. Because trade is not just about going to bring something from abroad and coming to sell here. No, it has to do with your input into manufacturing. It has to do with the equipment that you don't produce. It has to do with your capacity to export. All of these things are parts of trade. And they all have a way of influencing investment and economic growth. So we need to be more deliberate in ensuring that we have a trade policy framework that is supportive of investment, that is also very predictable.
Yeah. Predictability and supportive of investment. But let's look at what economists have argued, that the non-revision of the country's HS codes over the last few decades has hurt exports. What is your opinion as it affects manufacturing, agriculture, and even services? You just mentioned some of the issues of inputs.
No, the HS code issue, I don't think it has any major implication for exports, but it has implication for trade. Let me put it that way, trade generally.
Okay.
Because it seems to affect imports even more than export. And don't forget, if you look at our total trade, that is if you take out oil, our merchandise trade is almost 95% import. Because we don't export much. So the impact of this HS code confusion sometimes affect a lot more of importers than exporters. And this happens because there are too many tariff lines. When you have too many tariff lines, you have a lot of borderline cases, which gives the officials at the post some discretion to classify it one way or the other, and which is also not good for trade. Because the beauty of trade is to have not too many tariff lines.
Yeah.
You know, maybe 300, maybe 400, 500, but here we have thousands. So that is a major issue because it creates problem of classification. It leads to problem of discretion. And you know, discretion leads to corruption and extortion.
Yes.
So there's a need by way of a reform to reform the trade policy, particularly to streamline the tariff lines. So that we don't have too many tariff lines where there's a thin line between one product or the other, and each of them have different tariffs. So those things create problem for trade.
I mean, it's very clear, streamlining the tariff lines. And a major point here is that Nigeria needs a revised trade policy, which is long overdue, like you stated. And we looked at the opportunities in the AFCFTA. Nigeria needs to be globally competitive. From your perspective, what should be the priorities as we anticipate a revised trade policy, which we're all waiting for in the country?
You see, for us to get value from trade, we must not just be importing, we must also be exporting, almost in equal proportion. You know, if you take out oil, you are practically not exporting anything. You know, 95% of our trade is imports. When you look at, you know, the trade that we do, the only major component, because the export component of our, I mean, the oil component of our exports, I'm talking of crude oil, is over 95%. So if we take out crude oil exports, they are practically not exporting anything. We just have 5% non-oil exports. That doesn't have any significant developmental value. Because, I mean, how many people are involved in that? And most of the exports, non-oil exports, are primary products anyway, with very little value addition.
Value addition, which is
so for us to benefit from trade, our capacity to export must improve substantially. Our value-added capacity must improve substantially. That is the only way. Otherwise, if we continue to pursue, which is all this AFCTA and all of that, you know, it's about liberalizing trade, at least at the continental level.
Yes.
And that was the concern expressed by the Manufacturers Association at the onset of the negotiations for the AFCTA protocols. But the concerns were expressed that, well, we are producing in an environment that is very difficult. So we are not competitive. And that is true. So if you go full blast into the AFCTA now, we just become a market destination, not necessarily an investment destination. So people will produce in an environment where it is much more conducive and come and sell here because you have the largest market. So in order not to allow that to happen, we should not stand on the way of AFCTA, but we should, you know, quickly see what you can do to improve our domestic competitiveness. Because if you are not competitive, you cannot trade profitably. All you'll be doing is just importing. So that is extremely very important. We should be looking at our infrastructure. We should be looking at the state of our ports. We should be looking at the cost of funding. We should be looking at our, you know, energy. We should be looking at the quality of our logistics. These are the things that can facilitate, you know, export readiness or export competitiveness. And it's only through that the trade, the whole idea of trade, AFCTA and all of that can be beneficial to us as a country. Otherwise, we are just a destination we are just a market destination. We have to just come here and sell their products.
Well, Nigeria needs to be an investment destination, like we see the story of India, and we have to begin to, like you rightly said, prepare ourselves to be a key player in that area. And this is very fundamental, what you've said. The whole issue around trade is long overdue, and very clear insights from you on what needs to be done, because if we don't do this, it also affects our whole strategy of engagement across the world. But some economists have argued that international trade is overrated, that no nation trades itself to sustain growth. Do you agree? And when you look at some of these emerging economies like India and China, what's happening? What's your take on this?
No, it's not overrated. No country is an island. Even China, with all the export capacity, export competitiveness that they have, in 2023, their imports was over $2 trillion. The United States has over $3 trillion of imports. You know, they also import a lot.
Yeah.
They import to augment what they have. They import what they cannot produce competitively. Sometimes they also import to process and re-export. We have seen countries that come here to buy crude oil, they send it back to us as imports. You know? So trade is very essential. But for any country to benefit, because that should be the main focus. Yes. How can you optimize your benefit from trade? The way to optimize your benefit is not just to buy from other countries, it's also for you to be selling to other countries. That is what China is doing. They are buying, they are selling. That is what India is doing. They buy, they sell. And many other economies like that. So we have to do a lot more of that. In the service sector area, we are not doing badly. We have some capacity in ICT, financial services. Tourism, we are doing a lot in terms of export. You know, our churches are all over the place in Africa. That is also export. So we are doing not too badly when it comes to services, because the challenges of services is not as much
as manufacturing.
That is why production is lagging behind when it comes to export. So we need to do a lot more, you know, to scale up our productivity, because it's from increased productivity that you can have
productivity is very key.
Yeah. It's from competitiveness that you can optimize the benefits of trade.
Very true, Dr. Muda. Now, another area is the growth in patent ownership, which is embedded in achieving competitive trade. Nigeria is lagging. I know we have the National Office for Technology Acquisition and Promotion, but what must be done to improve in this area? Because there is a saying that there is a correlation between ownership of patent and national prosperity.
No, the issue is about the quality of our institutions, because intellectual property protection generally is extremely very weak in Nigeria. It's extremely very weak. If you invent anything, you make any discovery, within 6 months to 1 year, it's already all over the place. People are reproducing it, people are doing all sorts of things, both within the economy and even outside the country. So intellectual property is a big issue, not just in Nigeria, even in Africa. Because if you had a very strong institutional framework, both at the country level and at the continental level, I mean, many of our artists and publishers will have been multi-millionaires in dollar terms, because their works are all over the press.
Yes.
But people are pirating them, you know, and we don't have capacity to monitor. So intellectual property protection, we need to strengthen our capacity to protect intellectual property. And the individuals cannot do it alone. The private sector cannot do it alone. We need the state to put the force of the state, the force of government behind it, to ensure the protection of intellectual properties.
Yeah.
Because those who are in the creative industry are suffering from this. Those who are in publishing industry are suffering from it. And in some other areas as well. They suffer from all this, you know, piracy and all, even software and things like that. So I think it's a question of investing more to ensure a lot of enforcement of intellectual property rights. I think that is what needs to happen.
Yeah. And as we wrap up, Dr. Muda, the recent CBN directive on cybersecurity levy has raised concerns on harmonizing tax initiatives in the country. You've always been an advocate of a domestic environment that is enabling for businesses, and a harmonized tax initiative is very important for the country. What are your thoughts as we continue to see the Taiwo Idele Committee on Fiscal and Tax Reforms meet to ramp this up?
Well, we need to see a lot more harmonization within government. Because on one hand, we cannot be talking about harmonizing taxes, setting up a committee, and doing all of that, giving them time. On the other hand, we are seeing new taxes and levies, which is a complete contradiction of the whole idea of streamlining the number of taxes and rationalizing taxes. And from what I can see, I don't think there's proper harmonization and coordination in that space. And I think we need to see a lot more of that so that we don't see what looks like an internal contradiction in the direction in which the government is going. A lot of stakeholders have spoken against this. I think it's a policy or a legislation that whose implementation needs to be put on hold so that we have further engagement, further stakeholder engagement, interaction, and deliberation on it to ensure that we don't have another tax that will become another burden, both on businesses and on the citizens, because we have enough of that. So we should consolidate whatever they want to do into the work of the Presidential Committee on Tax Reforms. And let's have a holistic approach to the issue of taxation and revenue mobilization. I think that is the way to go.
Dr. Muda Yusuf, CEO, Center for Protection of Private Enterprise, and of course, former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, so much experience in trade and development. Thank you so much for your insights. Indeed, we need a supportive trade policy that attracts more investment to the economy. We need a lot of FDIs in Nigeria. We also need strong institutions that promote our intellectual property so we can create value from issues like patents, and also, like you rightly said, domestically, that coordination between fiscal and monetary to ensure that we have enabling environments for business growth and a larger self-inclusive economy. Thank you once again for the time, and look forward to further conversations on developments in the economy.
Thank you very much, Otto. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. To our viewers, if you want to get further insights on this very interesting conversation, visit the ProShare website displayed on the screen and follow our social media platforms to engage further on this show. To become your way again, enrich yourself with the knowledge of socioeconomic developments around you, because it is a wise thing to do. I'm Ottoabasi Abasiekong. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.